Shalom, shalom to all my fellow brothers and sisters out there. It's me again, Damian Powell from YeshuaSavesAll.com. Peace be to you in the name of our Father, Yahweh, and our Master, the Son of Yahweh, Yeshua HaMashiach. So today, my fellow brothers and sisters, we are going to be talking about purity laws. And I'm going to start off with the Temple Scroll. Like I said, one of my favorite books, Temple Scroll, column 51, and the complete Dead Sea Scrolls on page 209 says, Yahweh says, you shall forewarn the children of Israel about all the impurities. They shall not render themselves unclean by those of which I tell you on this mountain, and they shall not be unclean. For I, Yahweh, abide among the children of Israel. You shall sanctify them, and they shall be set apart. They shall not render themselves abominable by anything that I have separated for them as unclean, and they shall be set apart. Hallelujah, Yahweh. The Temple Scroll, which has already been proven as Torah. If you haven't seen that video, I will leave that in the description box. The Temple Scroll, which has already been proven to be Torah, warns the Israelites against all impurities. And that is what I'm going to do today. And that is to forewarn all my brothers and sisters in the body of Yeshua to do as Yahweh has commanded without turning to the right nor the left. We must continue to be sold out Talmudim, disciples of Yeshua, and be ready for his return. So we will be discussing the purity laws such as flux, nocturnal emission, sexual relations, menstrual cycles, childbirth, touching a corpse, and miscarriages. So the same way that Yahweh has already warned us in the Temple Scroll, his authority, his strictness in it, the same way he warned us to obey his purity laws, is the same way he warns about how many will feel about his laws. Let us not found to be amongst this group, as we see in the words of Moses, 1Q22 in the complete Dead Sea Scrolls, page 474. The words of Moses, 1Q22 says, Elohim spoke to Moses in the 40th year after the children of Israel had come out of the land of Egypt, in the 11th month on the first day of the month, saying, gather together all the congregation and go up to Mount Nebo and stand there. You and Eleazar, son of Aaron, interpret to the heads of the family of the Levites and to all the priests, and proclaim to the children of Israel the words of the law, which I proclaim to you on Mount Sinai. Proclaim carefully into their ears all that I require of them, and call heaven and earth to witness against them. For they will not love what I commanded them to do. Neither they nor their children during all the days they shall live upon the earth. For I say that they will abandon me and will choose the abomination of the nations, their horrors and their idols. They will serve false mighty ones, which shall be for them a snare and a pitfall. They will transgress against the set apart days, and against the Shabbat and the covenant, and against the commandments which I command you to keep this day. My brothers and sisters, repentance is at hand. Just as I mentioned in the Temple Scroll message, just as Josiah did, he tore his garments when the Torah was rediscovered. We all have strayed from Yahweh's ways, but now we have the complete Torah. It's time to walk in complete obedience to him. We should grieve over our disobedience, but be thankful that we can walk in the truth. We should all strive to be like the righteous Ezra regarding his obedience, humbleness, and purity, as is written in 2nd Ezra, 4th Ezra, chapter 6, verse 32, because your voice has surely been heard before the Most High. For the Mighty One has seen your uprightness and has observed the purity which you have maintained from your youth. Yeshua has already given us a strict warning that none of the Torah is done away with. He told us plainly that he did not come to speak his own words, because he spoke the words of his Father in John chapter 12, verse 49 through 50. So we have to keep that in mind while listening to this message. And again, what is one of the words that he spoke? Matthew chapter 5, verse 17 in HebrewGospels.com. Moreover, Yeshua Mashiach said to his Talmudim, his disciples, do not think that I came to throw down the Torah and the prophets. On the contrary, I came to confirm. I say unto you in truth, that not one word will be diminished from the Torah, that it would not be performed until the end of the world. Not one word from the Torah will be diminished, and all of it shall be performed until the end of the world. We know this to be true. We know this to be true because we proclaim the same scripture to Christianity. Luke chapter 16, verse 17, in the complete Jewish scriptures. But it is easier for heaven and earth to pass away than for one stroke of a letter in the Torah to become void. Malachi 3:6, because I, Yahweh, do not change, you sons of Jacob will not be destroyed. Psalms 89, verse 35 in the complete Jewish scriptures. I will not profane my covenant or change what my lips have spoken. And the son, Yeshua, is just like his father. And again, he spoke the words of his father. Hebrews 13:8, complete Jewish scriptures. Yeshua, the Messiah, is the same yesterday, today, and forever. We can't change him. So let us not be amongst that group that was mentioned in the words of Moses. And let us not be amongst this group that Yahweh speaks again in Isaiah 24, verse 5. In the complete Jewish scriptures, the land lies defiled under its inhabitants because they have transgressed the teachings, changed the law of Elohim who doesn't change, and broken the everlasting covenant. Therefore, a curse is devouring the land, and its inhabitants are punished for their guilt. It is why those living there waste away, and the people left are few. Thanksgiving hymns, the complete Dead Sea Scrolls, page 278. They who bore the yoke of my testimony have been led astray by the teachers of lies, and I rebelled against the service of righteousness. Whereas thou, O my Elohim, did command them to mend their ways by walking in the way of set apartness, where no man goes who is uncircumcised or unclean or violent. So does Yahweh want us to obey his purity laws? Let's take a look at what he says in his word. Leviticus chapter 10, verse 8 through 10. Leviticus chapter 10, verse 8 through 10. Yahweh said to Aaron, don't drink any wine or other intoxicating liquor, neither you nor your sons with you, when you enter the tent of meeting, so that you will not die. This is to be a permanent regulation throughout all your generations, that you will distinguish between the set apart and the common, and between the unclean and the clean, so that you would teach the people of Israel all the laws Yahweh has told them through Moses. Ezekiel chapter 22, verse 26. Her priests have done violence to my Torah, profaned my set apart things, made no difference between the set apart and common, not distinguished between the unclean and clean, hidden their eyes from my Shabbats and profaned me among them. So Yahweh wants us to know the difference between the clean and the unclean. It doesn't just stop with the dietary laws, which distinguishes between the clean and the unclean, but also his purity laws. We're going to go on even further here. The faithful Zadokite priests from the line of Aaron obeyed Yahweh in this manner, so they will be rewarded for their obedience and reappeared to teach these laws during the 1,000-year reign of Yeshua, the same way they taught it when they were in Qumran. Ezekiel chapter 44, verse 23 in the complete Jewish scriptures. They, the descendants of Zadok, are to teach my people the difference between set apart and common, and enable them to distinguish between the clean and the unclean. They are to be judges in controversies, and they are to render decisions in keeping with my rulings. So again, all of this, the dietary laws, the purity laws, all are distinguished between the clean and the unclean. This is what this is about. The Zadok priest taught it. The Damascus document, column 5, page 133, and the complete Dead Sea Scroll says, moreover, they profane the temple because they do not observe the distinction between clean and unclean in accordance with the law, but lie with a woman who sees her bloody discharge. Okay, so we know that that law is given in Leviticus 15, 23 through 24. We're going to go over that. Leviticus 18, 19, and Leviticus 20, 18. Let's go to the Damascus document, column 6, page 134 in the complete Dead Sea Scrolls. They shall take care to act according to the exact interpretation of the law during the age of wickedness. They shall separate from the sons of the pit and shall keep away from the unclean riches and wickedness acquired by vow or anathema, or from the temple treasure. They shall not rob the poor of his people, to make of widows their prey, and of the fatherless their victim. They shall distinguish between clean and unclean, and shall proclaim the difference between set apart and profane. They shall keep the Shabbat day according to its exact interpretation, and the feast and the day of fasting according to the finding of the members of the new covenant in the land of Damascus. So we see that it's clear is that Yahweh wants the clean and unclean to be distinguished. He wants them taught. The Zadok priests did that. In the book, The Biblical Calendar, Then and Now by Bill and Karen Bishop on page 26, they quote Herschel Shanks, which reads, Understanding the Dead Sea Scrolls, a reader from the Biblical Archaeology Review by Herschel Shanks. Page 80 through 81 says, quote, Jews disgusted with what they believed to be pollution of their ancestral religion and revolted by the usurpation of the high priesthood by non-Zadokites, rallied behind a man they called Moreh Zedek, which is the teacher of righteousness. No doubt, the teacher of righteousness was of the Zadokite line, a legitimate claimant to the title of high priest. He was opposed, however, by the wicked priest who ruled illegitimately in Jerusalem. The faithful retreated to the desert to live a life of ritual purity, observing the ancient law, following the old calendar that marked the set apart times, and awaiting the day when the teacher of righteousness would be accepted by all Jews as high priest and would return once again to Jerusalem. So we're about to get into the purity laws, but I want to say this: in these last days, we need to be like the Zadok priests and flee from the corruption of Judaism and live a life of ritual purity, observing the ancient law, which includes the temple scroll and jubilees, and follow the old calendar, which is the 364-day solar calendar, which we call the Zadok priestly calendar of creation, as we await the returning of Yeshua HaMashiach. Let us be ready. So let's get into the purity laws. I'm going to read Leviticus 15, and then we're going to break this all the way down. Yahweh said to Moshe, Moses, and Aharon, tell the people of Israel, when any man has a discharge from his body, the discharge is unclean. The discharge is unclean no matter whether it continues flowing or has stopped. It is still his uncleanness. Every bed which the person with the discharge lies on is unclean, and everything he sits on is unclean. Whoever touches his bed is to wash his clothes, bathe himself in water, and he will be unclean until evening. Whosoever sits on anything the person with the discharge sat on is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and he will be unclean until evening. Anyone who touches the body of the person with the discharge is to wash his clothes, bathe himself in water, and he will be unclean until evening. If the person with the discharge spits on someone who is clean, the latter is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and he will be unclean until evening. Any saddle that the person with the discharge rides on will be unclean. Whoever touches anything that was under him will be unclean until evening. He who carries those things is to wash his clothes, bathe himself in water, and he will be unclean until evening. If the person with the discharge fails to rinse his hands in water before touching someone, that person is to wash his clothes, bathe himself in water, and he will be unclean until evening. If the person with the discharge touches a clay pot, it must be broken. If he touches a wooden utensil, it must be rinsed in water. When a person with a discharge has become free of it, he has to count 7 days for his purification. Then he is to wash his clothes, bathe his body in running water. After that, he will be clean. On the 8th day, he is to take for himself 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, come before Yahweh to the entrance of the tent of meeting, and give them to the Kohen, the priest. The priest is to offer them. The one is for an iniquity offering, and the other as a burnt offering. Thus, the priest will make atonement for him on account of his discharge before Yahweh. And we know that our high priest, Yeshua HaMashiach, he gave himself up for our violation of the Torah. So, brothers, love each other as Yeshua loved himself and gave himself up for us as an offering, right? A sweet savor unto Yahweh, as Paul says in Ephesians 5:2. Right? So we got that. Now, verse 16, if a man has a seminal emission, a nocturnal emission, he is to bathe his entire body in water. He will be unclean until evening. Any clothing or leather on which there is any semen is to be washed with water. It will be unclean until evening. If a man goes to bed with a woman and has sexual relations, both are to bathe themselves in water. They will be unclean until evening. We know I talked about this in the Temple Scroll message, but we're going to go and talk about it here again today. If a woman has a discharge, and the discharge from her body is blood, she will be in her state of nida, the menstrual cycle, for 7 days. Whoever touches her will be unclean until evening. Everything she lies on or sits on in her state of nida will be unclean. Whoever touches her bed is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and he will be unclean until evening. Whoever touches anything she sits on is to wash his clothes, bathe himself in water, and he will be unclean until evening. Whether he is on the bed or on something she sits on, when he touches it, he will be unclean until evening. If a man goes to bed with her and her menstrual flow touches him, he will be unclean 7 days, and every bed he lies on will be unclean. If a woman has a discharge of blood for many days, not during her period, or if her discharge lasts beyond the normal end of her period, then throughout the time Throughout the time she is having an unclean discharge, she will be as when she is in nida. She is unclean. Every bed she lies on at any time when she is having her discharge will be for her like the bed she uses during her time of nida. And everything she sits on will be unclean, with her uncleanness like that of her time of nida. Whoever touches those things will be unclean. He is to wash his clothes, bathe himself in water, and he will be unclean until evening. If she has become free of her discharge, she has to count 7 days. After that, she will be clean. On the 8th day, she is to take for herself 2 doves or 2 young pigeons and bring them to the priest at the entrance to the tent of meeting. The priest is to offer the one for the iniquity offering and the other as a burnt offering. Thus the priest will make atonement for her before Yahweh on account of her unclean discharge. In this way, you will separate the people of Israel from their uncleanness, so that they will not die in the state of their uncleanness for defiling my tabernacle which is there with them. Such is the law for the person who has a discharge. For the man who has a seminal emission that makes him unclean, for the woman in nida during her menstrual period, for the person, man or woman with a discharge, and for the man who has sexual relations with a woman who is unclean. So notice the thing is that you don't want to die in the state of uncleanness. You see, there's certain things you have to do. You have to bathe yourself and wash your garments, right? Yahweh has certain laws concerning his purity laws, and it's very strictly defined in the temple scroll. We're going to go through all of this. The problem is that you don't want to stay in that state of uncleanness, and that's what he's talking about. Okay, now, what is the discharge from the man's body in verse 2? The Septuagint and the etymology give us that answer. Leviticus chapter 15, verse 2 in the Septuagint. And Yahweh spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and you shall say to them, whatever man has an issue out of his body, his issue is unclean. And this is the law of his uncleanness. Whoever has zovo, and the footnote says gonorrhea, out of his body. This is his uncleanness in him by reason of the issue, by which his body is affected through the issue. All the days of the issue of his body, by which his body is affected through the issue, there is his uncleanness. Now we go look at Leviticus chapter 15, verse 2 through 3 in the NIRV translation. Says, speak to the Israelites. Tell them, suppose liquid waste is flowing out of a man's body. That liquid is not clean. It does not matter whether it continues to flow out of his body or is blocked. Okay, so it's gonorrhea. This is the discharge. This is the flux mentioned in verse 2 that renders this man unclean. So if we look at www.nhs.uk, says this about gonorrhea. Typical symptoms of gonorrhea include a thick green or yellow discharge from the vagina or penis, pain when peeing, and in women bleeding between periods. The etymology of the word issue or discharge in verse 2 is zuv, H2100, which is defined by Brown Drivers Briggs as to flow, gush, issue, discharge. 1A, to flow, gush. 1A2, to die, pine away, figuratively. 1A3, to flow, of issue from woman, having issue, flux. Flowing participle. Now we go to Strong's. Strong's defines it as to flow freely as water. That is specifically to have a sexual flux. Figuratively, to waste away. Also to overflow, flush, gush out, have a running issue. pine away, run. Okay, so now we covered the flux. We're going to get into the nocturnal emission and sexual relations. Now, we will see that the emission of semen renders one unclean. We already saw that, right? But it does not get him quarantined, aka removed from the camp. And we see this in Leviticus, Numbers, and the Temple Scroll, but we're going to get into that. Whether it's a nocturnal emission or semen release through sexual relations, the number of days he is unclean is the same, as we will see. What is nocturnal emission? www.webmd.com says, quote, usually a wet dream happens while you are having a dream about sex, but not always. You may not even remember the dream. Doctors call wet dreams nocturnal emissions, but Yahweh already called it nocturnal emissions in the scriptures. Okay, so doctors only calling it what Yahweh's already called it. Nocturnal means at night. Emission is another way to say release. They are also sometimes called sleep orgasms. So let's look at Leviticus chapter 15, verse 16 again. If a man has a seminal emission, he is to bathe his entire body in water. He will be unclean until evening. Any clothing or leather on which there has any semen is to be washed with water. It will be unclean until evening. If a man goes to bathe with a woman and has sexual relations, both are to bathe themselves in water. They will be unclean until evening. So the Temple Scroll, the complete Dead Sea Scrolls on page 206 says this: no man who has had a nocturnal emission shall enter the sanctuary at all until 3 days have elapsed. He shall wash his garments and bathe on the first and the third day. He shall wash his garments and bathe, and after sunset he shall enter the sanctuary. They shall not enter my sanctuary in their impure uncleanness and render it unclean. So we see that the Temple Scroll matches the same thing with seminal emission. Okay, whether it's a nocturnal emission or having sexual relations, unclean for 3 days. And he says, they shall not enter into my sanctuary. How did the community deal with semen? The complete Dead Sea Scrolls 4Q Torah purities 4Q 274 is on page 236, and the complete Dead Sea Scroll says, when they sprinkle on him the first time, he shall bathe and wash his clothes before he eats. If it occurs for him on the seventh day on the Shabbat, he shall not sprinkle on the Shabbat, for he says, keep the Shabbat. And they put in parentheses, Deuteronomy 5:12. But he shall not touch anything pure until he has repeated it. All that touches semen, be it a man or a vessel, shall be immersed, and the bearer of it shall immerse. And the bearer of it shall immerse, and the garment on which it, the semen, is, and the vessel which it carries, it shall be immersed in water. If there is a man in the camp who is unable to do this, parentheses, lacks a spare garment, he shall bathe and put on any garment which has not been touched by it, the semen, as long as it does not touch his bread, parentheses, food. He who touches his bed or his seat, if his garment has not touched it, the semen, he shall bathe in water. But if his garment has touched it, the bed or the seat, he shall wash it, the garment. A man shall wash his garment with water for eating all consecrated food. So, how do the Samaritans deal with semen and worship? As we know, they follow the Torah stricter than Judaism. I quoted this in the message on Passover last year, but I'll repeat it here again. A rabbi named Simeon ben Gamliel commented on the Samaritans saying, quote, They were as Israelites in all things, and kept the law and the precepts of it, and even more exactly than the Israelites themselves did. So let's look at the Samaritan Torah, which I have right here. The Israelite Samaritan Torah. Like I said, I use many translations to dig for the emet, the truth. And Benjamin, or should I say Benjamin Zadaka, the editor and translator of the Samaritan Torah, says this on page 254, quote, laws of impurity at present times. The laws of impurity in the Torah are designated both for men and women. In the case of a man, when he becomes impure from intercourse or having a wet dream, he washes his flesh and with water and stays unclean until evening. If he became unclean, Friday, evening, he sits in the back of the synagogue and keeps his voice from praying loudly. He will not take part in the reading of the Torah portion. After the prayer of Shabbat morning, there is no shame in this because it happens to everybody. End quote. Now, notice how the Samaritans do at least acknowledge the uncleanness of a man with a nocturnal emission. Hallelujah. And they will limit his participation in the synagogue. The Samaritans without the temple scroll were close in how they applied this law. But let's turn to the Damascus document, who were very strict. And we already know about the Zadok priests. We already know about that, whom I endorse. Yahweh endorsed them. They were very strict in their observance of the Torah. Let's see what they say about this issue. All across the board. Damascus document, the complete Dead Sea Scrolls, column 11, page 142 says, no man entering the house of worship shall come unclean and in need of washing. Again, no man entering the house of worship shall come unclean and in need of washing. The Damascus document by Stephen D. Farad, I have many translations of it, comments on page 104, saying impure after having washed. This refers to someone in the intermediary state of impurity, having washed but not yet fully purified until evening, during which time access to the inner parts of the temple is restricted, unquote. So the man in the Samaritan community is restricted in his participation in the synagogue or house of worship, but according to the Zadok priest, he should not be present at all until he is fully clean. And this would go for all uncleanness. Now, let's look at sexual relations. As I explained in the message, as I mentioned before, the temple scroll is Torah, is that Leviticus says a man and woman who have sexual relations are unclean until evening. But Exodus in the temple scroll says 3 days. Again, they are unclean and prevented from entering Yahweh's presence, but not removed from the camp. Just as one with a nocturnal emission, 3 days is the number of days of uncleanness with semen. Like I said, whether it's sexual or a nocturnal emission. So again, let's go to Exodus chapter 19, verse 14 through 15 in the Samaritan. And Moshe went down from the mountain to the people and consecrated the people. And they washed their garments. And he said to the people, be ready for 3 days. Do not approach a woman. 3 days. Exodus chapter 19, verse 15 in the Septuagint. And he said to the people, be ready for 3 days. Do not come near to a woman. Okay, so then we go over to the temple scroll. Page 347, verses 11 through 12. And this one's from the other translation of the Temple Scroll that I have, the Charlesworth translation. That's on page 347, verses 11 through 12 says, a man who lies with his wife having an ejaculation of semen, he shall not enter the entire city of the sanctuary in which I shall allow my name to dwell for 3 days. The Temple Scroll is absolutely amazing. It's strictly defined. It's all here. And then we see again in the Septuagint, 1 Samuel chapter 21, verse 4 through 5 in the Septuagint. And the priest answered David and said, there are no common loaves under my hand, for I have none but set apart loaves. If the young men have been kept at least from women, then they shall eat them. And David answered the priest and said to him, yes, we have been kept from women for 3 days. Look at these witnesses that are matching up with the Temple Scroll. Now, next we're going to talk about concerning a woman on her menstrual cycle. Leviticus chapter 15, verse 19 through 20 in the Septuagint. And the woman, whoever has an issue of blood, when her issue is in her body, shall be in her separation 7 days. Everyone that touches her shall be unclean until evening. And everything on which she lies in her separation shall be unclean. And whatever she sits upon shall be unclean. Leviticus chapter 15, verse 19 through 20 in the Aramaic says, and if a woman has a discharge of blood, and her discharge is in her body, she shall be put apart for 7 days in her menstruation. Now, let's look at Leviticus chapter 15, verse 25 through 26 in the complete Jewish scriptures. If a woman has a discharge of blood for many days, not during her period, or if her discharge lasts beyond the normal end of her period, then throughout the time she is having an unclean discharge, she will be as when she is in Nida, her period. She is unclean. Every bed she lies on at any time while she is having her discharge will be for her like the bed she uses during the time of her Nida. And everything she sits on will be unclean with uncleanness like that of her time of Nida. So notice how the complete Jewish scripture shows that a woman is sleeping in a separate bed during the time of her Nida, her period. This distancing / separation is something that is literal. The Septuagint says a woman shall be in her separation for 7 days, and the Aramaic says put apart for 7 days. That's because it's literal. This matches the root words we find in this article. This article, female purity, Nida, Jewish Women's Archive. JWA.org states this, quote, chapter 15 of Leviticus serves as the basis for the Jewish menstrual laws. The Hebrew term used for menstruation, Leviticus 15, 19, 20, 24, and 33 is nidata, which has its roots in NDH, a word meaning separation, usually as a result of impurity. It is connected to the root NDD, meaning to make distant. This primary meaning of the root was extended in the biblical corpus to include concepts of iniquity and purity. The Aramaic Bible translations, Onkelos, 2nd century CE, Pseudo Jonathan, and Neophiti translate these verses with the root RHG, in her separation / distance, some adding of her impurity. Both roots reflect the physical separation of women during menstruation, or abnormal uterine bleeding, or the 7 or 14 days immediately postpartum, from physical contact, or from certain activities in which they would normally engage at other times. In other parts of the Bible, the term nidah was transferred to include abominable acts, objects, Ezekiel chapter 7, verse 19 through 20, or status, especially sexual iniquity, Leviticus 20:21, and idolatry. The use of the term nidah to describe the impurity of the land due to iniquity is found in Lamentations 1:8 and Ezra 9:11. And as an antonym, which means opposite of set apartness, in 2 Chronicles 29:5. These usages of the term may have influenced subsequent reactions to the state of menstruation. The term nidah was transformed into a metaphorical expression for iniquity and impurity in general. These meanings added to the original sense of distancing or separation, creating a new semantic range that influenced the legal and emotional understanding of nidah over the course of generations, unquote. So again, we go back to the Aramaic and the Septuagint, and it uses separation and put apart because it's a literal thing that must happen. And then we see the CJB, the Complete Jewish Scripture, says, like the bed she used during the time of her nidah. Okay, a separate bed. So let's go to Numbers chapter 5, verse 1 through 4. I like to point this one out because the temple scroll is just laying it all out, just spelling it out, right? But it's also found in the 66 books. So nobody can disregard the temple scroll's laws when we see Yahweh saying it right here in Numbers 5. Numbers chapter 5, verse 1 through 4 in the Complete Jewish Scriptures. Yahweh said to Moshe, order the people of Israel to expel from the camp. Order the people of Israel to expel from the camp everyone with leprosy, everyone with a discharge, and whoever is unclean because of touching a corpse. Both male and female you must expel. Put them outside the camp so that they won't defile their camp where I live among you. The people of Israel did this and put them outside the camp. The people of Israel did what Yahweh has said to Moshe. Now, so who are those that were quarantined and put outside the camp that we just read in Numbers chapter 5? If we go back to Leviticus 15, we see that the man with gonorrhea, flux, discharge, and the woman on her menstrual cycle were the two that were considered contagious. Because if they touched anyone, they would become unclean. This matches the literal words of separation and distancing that we see in Leviticus 15 regarding the menstruating woman. So let's go and look at Keel and Delich. I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing that part right. Biblical commentary on the Old Testament says, quote, removal on unclean persons out of the camp, as they say Jehovah, but Yahweh, the set apart one, dwelt in the midst of the camp of his people. Those who were affected with uncleanness of leprosy, Leviticus 13, of a disease flux, or menstruation, Leviticus 15:2, Numbers 15:19 is what they list here. And those who had become unclean through touching a corpse, Numbers 19:11, Leviticus 21:1, Leviticus 22:4. Whether male or female were to be removed out of the camp, that they might not defile it by their uncleanness. The command of Elohim to remove these persons out of the camp was carried out at once by the nation. And even in Canaan, it was so far observed that lepers at any rate were placed in special pest houses outside the cities. See at Leviticus 13:45-46. So we see that they agree with it. And also they say that the lepers were placed in special pest houses outside the cities. right? Now, let's go and look at the temple scroll, which matches that. And we're going to see a complete list of all those who were unclean and were put outside the camp. Temple scroll, the complete Dead Sea Scrolls on page 208. Yahweh says, in every city, ye shall set aside areas for those stricken with leprosy, with plague, and with scab, who shall not enter your cities and profane them. And also for those who suffer from flux, and for menstruating women, and for women after childbirth, so that they may not cause defilement in their midst by their impure uncleanness. The leper suffering from chronic leprosy or scab, who has been pronounced unclean by the priest. So Yahweh gives an entire list of those who are to be set into a certain area, okay, in every city. Those lepers, he says lepers, he says those with flux, menstruating women, women after childbirth, shall be set apart. Okay, so now we see that that is a match from what we read from Numbers chapter 5. He said, expel them from the camp. Hallelujah. So it all agrees. Now, another text in the Dead Sea Scrolls agrees with the language we read from Yahweh in the Temple Scroll. We're going to go to the complete Dead Sea Scrolls 4Q Toharot, 4Q 274, page 235. A woman with a 7-day issue of blood shall not touch a man with a flux, nor any vessel touched by a man who has a flux, nor anything he has lain or sat on. But if she has touched them, she shall wash her garments and bathe, and afterwards she may eat. Above all, she shall not mingle with the pure during her 7 days, so that she may not pollute the camps of the set apart of Israel. Same thing we read in the Temple Scroll in Numbers 5. Neither shall she touch any woman with a long-term issue of blood, and the person, either male or female, who counts the 7 days, she shall not touch the menstruant during her uncleanness. Only when she has purified herself from her uncleanness may she be touched. For the blood of the menstruant is reckoned as a flux for anyone who touches it. So these instructions are pretty clear, and they understood that it was a literal separation, which I mentioned earlier. Why is the woman who gave birth to a child quarantined like a menstruating woman? Because in her first 7 or 14 days, depending on if it's a male, if she gives birth to a male, she's in uncleanness for 7 days, and then 33 days for purification of her blood for a total of 40 days, right? And then for a female that is born, she's in her uncleanness for 14 days as in her nida, and then 66 days for purification of her blood for a total of 80 days. So Leviticus chapter 12, verse 1 through 5. Yahweh spoke to Moshe, tell the people of Israel, if a woman conceives and gives birth to a boy, she will be unclean for 7 days with the same uncleanness as in her nida, her period, when she is having her menstrual period. On the 8th day, the baby's foreskin is to be circumcised. She is to wait an additional 33 days to be purified from her blood. She is not to touch any set apart thing or come into the sanctuary until the time of her purification is over. But if she gives birth to a girl, she will be unclean for 2 weeks, as in her nida, her period. And she is to wait another 66 days to be purified from her blood. So if you notice, the childbearing woman, the menstruating woman, and the man with gonorrhea are in the same category as a leper. Even the 5 books of the Torah, our 66 books, agrees with the Temple Scroll that lepers were quarantined. which we see, well, we saw that in Numbers chapter 5, but let's go to Leviticus chapter 13, verses 1 through 2. Leviticus chapter 13, verses 1 through 4. I'm sorry. Leviticus chapter 13, verse 1 through 4. And I'm going to read it from the Samaritan. And Yahweh spoke to Moses, and Aharon, Aaron, saying, when a man has on the skin of his flesh a swelling or a scab or a bright spot, and it becomes a mark of leprosy on the skin of his flesh, that he shall be brought to Aaron the priest, or to one of his sons the priest. And the priest shall look at the mark on the skin of the flesh. And if the hair in the infection has turned white, and the infection appears to be deeper than the skin of the flesh, it is an infection of leprosy. And the priest will see, and he shall pronounce him unclean. And if the bright spot is white on the skin of his flesh, it does not appear to be deeper than the skin, and the hair on it has not turned white. Then the priest shall isolate him, having the infection, for 7 days. He shall isolate him. And the priest will see on the 7th day, and if in his eyes the infection has not changed, the infection not spreading on the skin, then the priest shall isolate him for 7 more days. So here's a literal, physical isolation, separation. Then we see in Numbers chapter 12, verse 9 through 16 in the Samaritan what happened to Miriam. And the anger of Yahweh burned against them, and he departed. And the cloud had withdrawn from over the tent, and behold, Miriam was leprous as snow. And Aaron turned toward Miriam, and behold, she was leprous. And Aaron said to Moses, my master, I beg you, do not account this iniquity to us in which we have acted foolishly, in which we have transgressed. Let her not to be like one dead, whose flesh is half eaten away when he comes from his mother's womb. And Moses cried out to Yahweh, saying, El, please heal her. And Yahweh said to Moses, and had her father but spit in her face, obviously she would not bear her shame for 7 days. Let her be shut up for 7 days outside the camp. Be shut up for 7 days outside the camp, and afterward she may be received again. And Miriam was shut up outside the camp for 7 days, and the people did not move on until Miriam did return. So Miriam, the sister of Moses, wasn't shown any partiality. She still had to observe what happens with the laws of a leper, to be quarantined for 7 days. And again, the temple scroll lists the lepers, the menstruating woman, one with a childbearing woman, and a man with the flux, gonorrhea, are in the same category. So again, let's turn to the Samaritans, who are strict Torah observers, as I said before, and see how they apply the law of a woman during her menstrual cycle today. So Benjamin Zadaka, the editor and translator of the Samaritan Torah, says this on page 254. So you can kind of get an idea. When a woman becomes unclean by her monthly period, she moves from her regular bedroom to a special bedroom in the house and stays there for 7 days. The room is furnished and has all facilities to give her the full comfort for 7 days. She is untouchable by anyone in the family or the community or the whole family, and the whole family is devoted to her in order to provide all her needs. All her requests will be placed beside her bed or the place where she is sitting, and she will take from there, be it food or clothes or anything. She will take the chair that she sits on outside to be cleaned overnight by the dew. During the 7 days, she may go to her place of study or work and return back to her room. She may walk in the house, but without touching anything. So look like she's working from home, or study or work and return back to her room. She may walk in the house, but without touching anything that is able to become impure. Every day, impure. Every day she washes herself. However, all her duties as the mother of the house are done by other members of the family. If she has young children, she makes an arrangement with one of her women neighbors to take care of her children until her husband returns back from work. A nursing baby remains with her. When her neighbor is impure, she returns the favor by helping in the same way. This exchange contributes much to kind relationships between Samaritan families. At the end of the 7 days, she immerses in the home bath of living water. She immerses her whole self under a filled bath with tap still flowing. Unquote. So we see that the Samaritans do quarantine the women and that everyone pitches in to help her. The woman will make arrangements with her neighbors to care for her children when she is on her period if the husband is not home. This matches what we read in the Dead Sea Scrolls, where we go to the Damascus document manuscripts from cave number 4, 4Q 266, fragment 6, on page 150 in the complete Dead Sea Scrolls. And a woman who conceives and bears a male child shall be unclean for 7 days, like her menstrual days. On the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. She shall continue for 33 days in the blood of her purifying. But if she bears a female child, she shall be unclean for fortnight as her menstruation. For 66 days she shall continue in her blood of purifying. And then they put in parentheses Leviticus 12, 2 through 5. And she shall not eat sacred food, and shall not enter the sanctuary, for it is a capital crime. Let her give the child to a wet nurse who is in the state of purity. So as they say, it's a capital crime, and let her give the child to a wet nurse who is in the state of purity. So let's look at this. Thanksgiving hymns. The complete Dead Sea Scrolls, hymn 15, page 283 says, I am in sinful guilt, and from the breast of my mother in injustice, and in the bosom of my nurse in great impurity. What is a wet nurse? A wet nurse is defined by Merriam-Webster as a woman who cares for and breastfeeds young, not her own. We just saw that in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and then in the Thanksgiving, from the Damascus document, and from the Thanksgiving hymns. He says, in the bosom of his nurse. Let's go to Thanksgiving hymns, the Dead Sea Scrolls, hymn 15, page 282. You have made me a father to the sons of mercy, and as a foster father to men of marvel. They have opened their mouths like little babes, like a child playing in the lap of its nurse. So this is not new. We see this in Scripture. Genesis 24, verse 59 in the Samaritan. And they sent away their sister Rebekah and her nurse, which we know was Deborah, with Abraham's slave and his men. In every city, ye shall set aside areas for those stricken with leprosy, with plague, and with scab, who shall not enter your cities and profane them, and also for those who suffer from flux, and for menstruating women, and women after childbirth. Temple Scroll. So again, the woman who gives birth is unclean, just like her menstrual cycle. Like I said, 7 to 14 days, depending on if it's a male or a female. Therefore, a woman on her menstrual cycle should have another care for her children, as the Damascus document and the Samaritans say. Torah observant believers can achieve this by working with other fellow Torah observant believers, or of course, living in a community like the Samaritans would help. Or even if it comes down to it, hire help. I believe that there are still wet nurses out there. You know, you interview them and all of that, whatever it takes, a nanny to watch over your children in the state of your impurity. Now, let me make this clear. I know everyone can't afford to do this. I'm just merely making a suggestion, okay, to help all of us return back to the ancient path. As I said in the introduction, just because we live in the West doesn't give us the right to break Yahweh's Torah. The best answer that I can give you is this. Take it into prayer and let Yahweh guide you concerning this, and let him make a way for you. He makes a way for those who want to obey him, who have a heart to obey. You have to trust them. Now let's talk about a dead body. So we covered that a little earlier when we went through Numbers 19, but let's talk about it from the Temple Scroll. The complete Dead Sea Scrolls, page 208 through 209. Very strict instructions. If a man dies in your cities, the house in which the dead man has died shall be unclean for 7 days. Whatever is in the house, and whoever enters the house shall be unclean for 7 days. Any food on which water has been poured shall be unclean. Anything moistened shall be unclean. Earthenware vessels shall be unclean, and whatever they contain shall be unclean for every clean man. The open vessels shall be unclean for every Israelite with whatever is moistened in them. On the day when the body is removed from there, they shall cleanse the house of all pollution of oil, wine, and water moisture. They shall rub its, parentheses, the house, floor, walls, and doors, and shall wash with water the bolts, doorposts, thresholds, and lintels. On the day when the body is removed from there, they shall purify the house and all its utensils, hand mills and mortars, and all utensils of wood, iron, and bronze, and all utensils capable of purification. Clothes, sacks, and skins shall be washed. As for the people, whoever has been in the house or has entered the house shall bathe in water and shall wash his clothes on the first day. On the third day, they shall sprinkle purifying water on them and shall bathe. They shall wash their garments and all the utensils in the house. And on the seventh day, they shall sprinkle them a second time. They shall bathe, wash their clothes and utensils, and shall be clean by the evening of the impurity contracted from the dead. It's kind of like when people say somebody gets sick, you contract that sickness. That's how Yahweh looks at uncleanness, especially here the dead. So by the evening of the impurity contracted from the dead, so as to be fit to touch their pure things. As for a man who has not been rendered unclean on account of, then it's fragmented, they have been unclean. No longer, then it's fragmented, until they sprinkled them the second time on the seventh day, and shall be clean by the evening at sunset. Whoever touches the bone of a dead person in the fields, or one slain by the sword, or a dead body, or the blood of a dead person, or a tomb, he shall purify himself according to the rule of this statute. But if he does not purify himself according to this rule of this statute, of this law, he is unclean, his uncleanness being still in him. Whoever touches him must wash his clothes, bathe, and he shall be clean by evening. Now, Let's go to miscarriages. Temple Scroll, page 209. If a woman is with child and it dies in her womb, as long as it is dead in her, she shall be unclean like a tomb. Any house that she enters shall be unclean with all its utensils for 7 days. Whoever touches it shall be unclean till the evening. If anyone enters the house with her, he shall be unclean for 7 days. He shall wash his clothes and bathe in water on the first day. And on the third day he shall sprinkle and wash his clothes and bathe. On the seventh day he shall sprinkle a second time and wash his clothes and bathe. At sunset he shall be clean. As for all the utensils, clothes, skins, and all the materials made of goat's hair, ye shall deal with them according to the statute of this law. All earthenware vessels shall be broken, for they are unclean and can no more be purified ever. Yahweh has given us every detail on what we need to do to distinguish between the clean and the unclean, as we saw in Ezekiel 22:26, Ezekiel 44:23, Leviticus 10:10 through 11, and in the Damascus document. Okay, he wants us to distinguish between the clean and unclean and obey them so that nobody stays in their uncleanness. He has specific instructions he wants us to do. So let us all strive to Shema, to hear and obey. As we see it written in Exodus chapter 20, verse 16, F and the Samaritan. You go near and hear all that Yahweh or Elohim may say, and tell us all that Yahweh or Elohim says to you, and we will hear and do it. We will hear and do it. We will hear and apply it. Exodus chapter 24, verse 7, in the Samaritan. And he took the book of the covenant and read in the hearing of the people. And they said, all that Yahweh has spoken, we will hear and we will do. Exodus chapter 24, verse 7 in the Septuagint. And he took the book of the covenant and read it in the ears of the people. And they said, all the things that Yahweh has spoken, we will do and listen to obey. Romans chapter 2, verse 13 in complete Jewish scriptures. For it is not merely the hearers of the Torah whom Elohim considers righteous. Rather, it is the doers of what Torah says who will be made righteous in Elohim's sight. Yaakov, James 1:22, HebrewGospels.com. But you must be of those who do the word, and not of those who hear only, by which they deceive you. And then Yeshua, Luke 11:28, the complete Jewish scriptures. But he said, far more blessed are those who hear the word of Elohim and obey it. Hallelujah. Hearing the word of Yahweh and obeying it by putting it into action in our lives will return us back to the ancient path, and we will find eternal rest. Jeremiah 6:16. Here is what Yahweh says. Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask about the ancient paths. Which one is the good way? Take it and you will find rest for your souls. But they said, we will not take it. Will you be one who takes the ancient path? Or will you be one who says, we will not take it? The choice is yours. Isaiah chapter 64, verse 4 in the complete Jewish scriptures. You favored those who were glad to do justice, those who remembered you in your ways. When you were angry, we kept transgressing. But if we keep your ancient ways, we will be saved. Hallelujah. Again, we obey the written Torah and have faith and believe in the living Torah, which is Yeshua. Revelation 14:12. Let us return. And as always, may Yahweh bless you in Yeshua HaMashiach's name. Shalom.